Good morning. My name is Patrick Braga. I moved to Michigan this summer to work as a development project manager at the Detroit Housing Commission, which is the public housing authority serving Detroit and its surrounding communities. I'd like to propose a policy agenda that the City of Detroit and DHC can pursue together to redefine how housing is built in Detroit. While this presentation builds on my work at the DHC, I'd like to make it clear that this is my professional opinion and not necessarily that of the entire agency. DHC has public stewardship over approximately 3,000 homes in Detroit and manages a Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher program. DHC's current aspiration is to become a vibrant public sector developer of income-eligible housing. We're fairly constrained, though, by federal regulations surrounding the perennially underfunded Section 9 public housing program. The Section 9 program prevents DHC from doing standard real estate practices that private and nonprofit developers use all the time to reinvest capital into new projects or to save for maintenance needs. Federal rules around how DHC can spend its existing money make it difficult for DHC to extend its impact in the city. So I'm working to acquire these gorgeous, publicly owned, vacant, historic buildings in the Dexter-Linwood neighborhood and to rehabilitate them as affordable housing. The buildings are there, DHC has money ready in a bank account, and both the land bank and the city have expressed interest in selling DHC these properties. Yet I'm staring down a months-long federal approvals process while those buildings remain exposed to the elements and while thousands of Detroit households remain rent-burdened. In response to this restrictive experience, lately I've been learning in depth how DHC can reposition its portfolio with programs such as the Rental Assistance Demonstration Program, or RAD, which will give DHC greater local autonomy, fewer federal restrictions, and a stronger ability to build new housing in Detroit. When I first arrived here, I spent countless hours driving and walking the city, trying to understand why neighborhoods are variably inhabited, newly inhabited, struggling, or simply an urban prairie. And being fresh out of grad school, I turned to academic research for an additional perspective, and I encountered an article called Rethinking Detroit by 3 economists at the Richmond Federal Reserve, and one of whom is also at Princeton. And their article develops a microeconomic model suggesting what it would take to make private development happen where it should make sense to in Detroit. The author's core idea is that no resident wants to be first to move into a vacant neighborhood, and no developer wants to be first to invest in a vacant neighborhood. Therefore, either a government or a private entity should guarantee financially that new development will occur in predetermined locations in the city. The economists used City of Detroit data to estimate which census tracts would generate the greatest public and private benefit if they were more fully redeveloped. Reconciling this first mover problem or coordination problem is a similar instinct to what Midtown Detroit Inc. has done, and we can imagine this happening in a strategic neighborhood fund area too. For example, the city could identify a census tract or a cluster of blocks and announce, if the private market doesn't invest $50 million in new housing and commercial development in these blocks by 2025, the public sector will. DHC and the city could collaborate if DHC were the designated public developer in cases where the private sector won't act even with a guarantee. This is effectively the role DHC took in the last recession when it was one of the few developers doing large projects within the city, such as the successful Woodbridge Estates redevelopment. I then wanted to take this core idea of guaranteed development and supplement the economists' findings with an on-the-ground perspective, implementing development guarantees around the mobility needs of low and moderate income households. At DHC, I calculated from the 2018 American Community Survey data that over 60,000 low-income households in Detroit were rent-burdened, paying more than 35% of their income on rent. I then thought to the 10 Connect 10 bus routes, which have 15-minute peak frequency and 24/7 service, and wondered, what if we built 6,000 affordable homes along each bus route for a total of 60,000? That would meet present housing needs while realigning Detroit as a city with a transit-friendly urban fabric within its boundaries. And we'd still be the motor city because buses have motors too. Before sketching my 8-part policy agenda for how DHC and the city can collaborate, I first want to tell a story. Let's look ahead to 2030 and zoom into the life of a single father and his 2 children living in Detroit. The father works 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet and still only makes half of the area median income. Every school day, the family wakes up on the top floor of a 3-story building which was only built 4 or 5 years prior. 8 of its 12 apartments are reserved for low and moderate income families. The neighborhood where the small family lives surrounds a bus stop and is a dense mix of 2, 3, and 4-story buildings. This pattern has been cropping up along Detroit's main avenues, such as Gratiot, Warren, and 7 Mile. For the father, it looked as though all the developers became suddenly convinced that instead of holding out, waiting for someone else to make a first move, they would all build at the same time. He even heard in the local news how it was just 2 or 3 months between when these projects were proposed and when construction began. And even private for-profit developers were building mixed-income housing, not just nonprofits or DHC. After the kids are off to school, the father walks 2 blocks to get on the bus for work. Taking the bus is easy in Detroit. He doesn't have to pay a fare, the buses run in their own dedicated lanes, and they have autonomous features so they can travel faster and control the traffic signals in their favor. Buses arrive every 10 or 15 minutes. At the bus stop, he says good morning to Miss Eliza, a senior on a low fixed income who lives in a more vacant part of the neighborhood. Miss Eliza takes a semi-autonomous shuttle to get from her house to the high-capacity bus line. The father notices that near the next stop, a new neighborhood similar to his is under construction. There are already some 4 or 5 buildings rising on each side of the street. It's as though his neighborhood had been deemed complete by the city, and the next neighborhood was given permission to open up. This vision of an inclusive and transit-oriented Detroit is possible. Together, the city and the Detroit Housing Commission can guarantee it to happen through an 8-part strategy combining recent urban planning research and practice. If the city and the Housing Commission partner to promote and pilot strategies like these, Detroit will be setting the tone for equitable development in the Midwest. I've already explained the development guarantee idea, so second, by right building permits for affordable housing recently became law in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I was part of the advocacy campaign for the law. So long as a building meets the dimensional requirements in the city's zoning code and is 100% for households making below median income, then the building only needs as much zoning and fire safety review as a single-unit detached house. By making building permits a matter of right, the law fast-tracks both the approvals and funding timelines for affordable housing. From DHC's perspective, the agency issues RFPs to co-develop projects with private partners. So if we could market that Detroit offers by-right approvals for affordable housing, that would make Detroit a more competitive location and would make it faster on the city side to see initiatives like Housing for the Future Fund or the Strategic Neighborhood Fund have immediate impact, since so many funding sources require that projects demonstrate zoning compliance. Third, pre-approved floor plans are currently happening in Arkansas and Texas, and that's a policy that the city can design with active input from DHC and other local developers. Pre-approved blueprints would guarantee that new housing reflects the vision of residents and local officials. This policy also recognizes that architects are expensive. If the city predetermines not just building types, like the Brush Park form-based code does so well, but also blueprints that could be chosen from a public catalog, this can streamline permitting and reduce the upfront costs of producing new housing. The city could even choose to offer pre-approved designs only to affordable or substantially mixed-income projects. And to avoid a cookie-cutter result, the city could have a cap on the number of times a specific facade could be used within a certain radius, or allow developers to keep a floor plan and hire an architect just for the building envelope. Next, bundled disposition of land is an idea that emerged from work in the Housing Commission. We were in a neighborhood walking one of those vacant buildings when our CEO floated the idea. What if we could rehab all the houses on a single street at once? In addition to how the land bank currently auctions scattered houses dispersed across the city, perhaps they could adopt an additional strategy of selling contiguous rows of vacant houses or offering bundles of, say, 6 houses across the street from one another to one developer to rehab and create islands of stability deep in the neighborhoods. I've floated the idea to one of the staff members at the DLBA, specifically chatting about how once DHC completes a revitalization project such as this one, the DLBA could market the surrounding houses as a single bundle, even if DHC itself doesn't have internal capacity to rehab all those buildings simultaneously. And I recognize this next policy point is more cross-cutting than housing alone, but housing and transportation are intimately linked. And I've described my vision for the Connect 10 corridors and even the idea of charging zero fare for transit, which is being implemented in Kansas City this year. Just like roads aren't free, zero-fare transit wouldn't be free either. But it could be funded by several means, such as diverting money already within the city budget. For instance, by my calculations, the People Mover as a single transit route has 2.5 times more of an operating budget than the rest of the DDOT bus routes on a per route basis. Another idea could be transfer of development benefits, where taxes would not increase, but a portion of tax revenues from the most tax-productive neighborhoods in the city are dedicated to citywide equity initiatives such as the Connect 10 routes without increasing taxes. And perhaps all new property tax revenues from the housing built along the Connect 10 corridors could be dedicated toward funding transit. Finally, the BuyRide approvals that I described can occur successively along the transit routes. At the point when a new neighborhood around a bus stop reaches a critical mass, such as, say, 75% of the level of guaranteed development, only then can the next neighborhood along the Connect 10 route receive the benefits of by right development, guaranteed development, and pre-approved or fast-tracked plans and permits. And the city should update the target number of units annually in response to data from the American Community Survey, as well as needs that DHC identifies in the community. I call this general universe of strategies dynamic zoning, and I presented this concept at last year's Congress for the New Urbanism. Another role that DHC can play in a successive dynamic zoning strategy is for the city to give DHC priority permitting or priority site selection from available land bank or city parcels in the new neighborhood so that every new transit-oriented neighborhood is kicked off by publicly owned affordable housing. In short, with these 8 policies, the City of Detroit and the Detroit Housing Commission together can make the story I told earlier be a real experience for low-income families. By framing a policy of guaranteed development around high-quality transit in high-quality neighborhoods with high-quality affordable housing, Detroit can pioneer a model for equitable urban change with broad applicability beyond our boundaries. Thank you.